October 27th, 1944. Hill 617. The Vosges Mountains, eastern France. A relentless downpour had persisted for 3 full days. Within the dense coniferous woods of the Vosges, visibility diminished to less than 10 feet. Temperatures hovered just above freezing, transforming the mountainous trails into slick arteries of mud. Somewhere in this desolate landscape, 275 men from the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry Regiment, affectionately known as the Alamo Regiment from Texas, were entrenched in shallow defensive pits. They were encircled by German forces, their supplies of ammunition, sustenance, and hope dwindling to critical levels. They had been beleaguered for 3 days, ensnared by a strategic directive that would later be recognized as one of the most contentious decisions in American military annals. Now, as German artillery systematically bombarded their perimeter, their sole recourse rested with an improbable contingent of liberators, Japanese-American soldiers whose own families were interned in American confinement facilities. The ensuing 6 days would etch themselves into the realm of legend. It was a rescue operation so harrowing that the rescuers sustained more casualties than the number of men they liberated. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team would endure the loss of over 800 men to extricate 211 trapped Texans. In doing so, they would profoundly disrupt German military assumptions regarding American combat prowess and compel America itself to confront its ingrained biases. This is the narrative of the Lost Battalion rescue, an engagement counted among the 10 most pivotal ground battles in the history of the United States Army. According to military historians, it is a chronicle of improbable valor, dubious strategic choices, and the immutable cost of proving allegiance through bloodshed. The crisis commenced on October the 24th, 1944, initiated by a directive that disregarded fundamental military tenets. Major General John Ernest Dahlquist, commanding the 36th Infantry Division, commanded the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry Regiment, to advance beyond Allied lines into the heavily wooded Vosges Mountains. Their objective, to secure elevated terrain near Bifontaine and disrupt German supply arteries. Lieutenant Martin Higgins, the battalion's operations officer, immediately apprehended the perilous situation. The unit was slated to advance without protective flanks, without any reserve forces, and without a secure logistical conduit. The narrow logging track, their solitary link to friendly forces, was susceptible to being severed by German units. However, Dahlquist, operating from his command post miles behind the front, adamantly pushed for an aggressive advance. By noon on October the 24th, the battalion had progressed approximately 4 miles, reaching their objective, a narrow elevation designated Hill 205. They established defensive positions amongst the pine trees, anticipating a link-up with the remainder of their regiment. This rendezvous never materialized. The German 19th Army, under the command of General Friedrich Wiese, had meticulously anticipated precisely this scenario. Elements of the Wehrmacht had deliberately ceded certain positions, luring the Americans into what military strategists term a planned encirclement. Once the battalion was in place, German forces launched a synchronized assault from 3 directions. Units from the German 2001st Mountain Battalion occupied the high ground overlooking the American emplacement. The 933rd Grenadier Regiment severed the supply road to their rear. Additional German contingents sealed any remaining breaches. Within hours, the 1st Battalion found itself completely encircled by an estimated 6,000 to 8,000 German combatants. The German forces had dedicated weeks to fortifying their positions within the Vosges. They had constructed reinforced bunkers, deployed thousands of mines, including wooden shoe mines, undetectable by metal detectors, and positioned artillery on reverse slopes, rendering them invulnerable to American counter-battery fire. Most devastating, however, was their deployment of tree-burst artillery. Shells were fused to detonate within the forest canopy, unleashing lethal volleys of shrapnel and wooden fragments that rendered foxholes virtually obsolete. Within 24 hours of their encirclement, the beleaguered battalion's predicament escalated to critical. German forces initiated probing assaults from multiple vectors while maintaining a relentless barrage of mortar and artillery fire. The Americans, who had anticipated a brief offensive, were equipped only with standard combat loads of ammunition and 3 days' worth of rations. Water rapidly emerged as their most pressing deficiency. The sole available source was a stream located 60 yards beyond their perimeter, completely exposed to German machine gun emplacements. Soldiers risked their lives, crawling out under the cloak of darkness, pressing themselves into the mud as tracer rounds arced overhead, attempting to refill canteens and helmets. Many never returned. Efforts to resupply by air proved repeatedly unsuccessful. P-47. Thunderbolts from the 365th Fighter Group attempted parachute drops of essential supplies. However, amidst the dense foliage and pervasive fog, a majority of the packages fell into German hands or were lost to the wilderness. Of the numerous supply drops attempted, the trapped battalion managed to recover only a meager handful. On October 26th, other elements of the 141st Infantry attempted the initial rescue. They advanced less than 800 yards before being decisively halted by German defenses. The 142nd Infantry Regiment made the subsequent attempt, aiming to outflank German positions by traversing an adjacent valley. They unwittingly marched into a minefield covered by pre-registered artillery fire and were compelled to withdraw after sustaining grievous casualties. Radio operator Erwin Blonder maintained intermittent communication with division headquarters, utilizing the battalion's final operational SCR-300 radio. Limited battery power permitted only 2 transmissions daily. The messages grew increasingly desperate as the days elapsed, conveying urgent requests for medical supplies, ammunition, and immediate reinforcement. On October 27th, as conventional rescue endeavors continued to falter, General Dahlquist issued the directive that would forever define his controversial legacy. He ordered the 442nd Regimental Combat Team to breach German lines and reach the Lost Battalion. His precise words, recorded by his aide, were, "Get them out at any cost." The 442nd had only recently been withdrawn from the front lines after 9 consecutive days of combat that led to the liberation of the towns of Bayer and Bifontaine. They had sustained considerable losses and had been relegated to reserve status for a mere 36 hours. This was insufficient time to integrate replacements, repair equipment, or recuperate. Many soldiers still wore their summer uniforms in the frigid mountain conditions. The 442nd was a unique entity within the American military, a segregated unit comprised exclusively of Japanese-American soldiers, or Nisei, second-generation Japanese-Americans. While they fought valiantly in Europe, approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans, including many of their own relatives, remained incarcerated in internment camps across the western United States, detained without due process under Executive Order 9066. The unit's adopted motto was "Go for broke," a Hawaiian slang phrase signifying an all-or-nothing commitment. They had already distinguished themselves in Italy, earning more commendations in 6 months than most units accumulated over years. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller, commanding the 100th Infantry Battalion, attached to the 442nd, lodged a direct protest with Dahlquist regarding the order. His men were in dire need of rest and winter gear. Dahlquist's retort was unyielding. American soldiers were perishing, and the 442nd would undertake their rescue. At 0400 hours on October the 28th, the 442nd commenced its advance. The operational plan dictated that the 100th Battalion would attack the right flank, the 2nd Battalion the left, with the 3rd Battalion held in reserve. The 522nd Field Artillery Battalion was designated to provide support, though the dense forest and adverse weather rendered accurate fire virtually impossible. The prevailing conditions were hellish. Torrential rain had transformed every pathway into a quagmire. The Germans, having prepared for weeks, had established interlocking fields of fire, meticulously mined approach routes, and registered artillery fire on every conceivable avenue of advance. The initial contact occurred shortly after dawn. Forward elements of Company E blundered into an ambush. German MG-42 machine guns unleashed a torrent of fire from concealed positions at point-blank range. Within seconds, multiple soldiers were incapacitated. The 442nd's response was immediate and ferocious. Instead of seeking cover and requesting artillery support, they fixed bayonets and charged directly into the German emplacements. This tactic, a frontal assault against fortified positions, contravened standard American military doctrine, which prioritized firepower over maneuver. However, the Nisei soldiers had discovered that aggressive close-quarters combat could overcome defensive advantages. German soldiers, conditioned to anticipate American withdrawals when confronted with heavy casualties, were psychologically unprepared for adversaries who persisted in their advance despite mounting losses. Company K, advancing on the opposing flank, encountered a minefield. The initial detonation severed a soldier's foot at the ankle. As medical personnel rushed forward, additional mines detonated. The company was forced to halt while engineers crawled forward on their bellies, probing for mines with their bayonets. By the conclusion of the first day, the 442nd had advanced less than a mile at a monumental cost. Yet, they had achieved a significant breakthrough. They had identified the primary German defensive line situated along a series of ridges that obstructed access to the Lost Battalion. October 29th and 30th would witness some of the most intense combat of the Second World War. The crucial geographical feature was Hill 617, a precipitous ridge that commanded all access points to the Lost Battalion. The Germans had transformed it into a veritable fortress, complete with 3 distinct trench lines, reinforced concrete emplacements, and expertly registered artillery support. The assault commenced at dawn with a massive artillery barrage, unleashed by the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion. Over 4,000 rounds impacted German positions within 3 hours, yet the bunkers, constructed into the reverse slope, remained largely intact. As the 442nd Infantry advanced, they were met with withering fire. What transpired next has become legendary in military history. Individual soldiers, observing their assaults falter, exhibited acts of extraordinary valor. Private Barney Hajiro, a recent arrival from Hawaii, rose to his feet in full view of German positions and advanced through a hail of machine gun fire. He single-handedly neutralized 2 machine gun nests and eliminated 2 snipers, even after sustaining a wound to his shoulder. His actions galvanized his entire company to rise and charge. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Private George Joe Sakato led a charge that transformed imminent defeat into victory. When his platoon found itself pinned down and in danger of being overrun, Sakato single-handedly assaulted a German emplacement defended by 12 soldiers. He eliminated 12 enemy combatants, wounded 2 and captured 4, thereby enabling his unit to advance. These individual acts of bravery empowered the 442nd to breach German lines, but the expenditure was staggering. Company K, which had begun with 186 men, was reduced to 17 riflemen still capable of fighting. Company I fared even worse, with only 8 of its 185 men remaining unharmed. Technical Sergeant Teo Senzaki was among the first to reach the Lost Battalion, arriving at approximately 1600 hours on October 30th. His initial recorded words to the stranded Texans were, "Need any cigarettes?" The link-up had been achieved, but the battle was far from concluded. Reaching the Lost Battalion represented only half the mission. They still needed to be evacuated through 2 miles of enemy-controlled territory. The Germans immediately launched counterattacks to re-establish their cordon, resulting in intense engagements throughout the night of October 30th. The evacuation commenced with the wounded. Nisei soldiers carried stretchers through mine-laden forests, while German snipers and artillery continued their deadly work. Each evacuation trip spanned hours, with the bearers frequently compelled to pause for rest or to seek cover from enemy fire. The walking wounded and able-bodied soldiers of the Lost Battalion were evacuated over the subsequent 2 days. Throughout this period, the 442nd was tasked with maintaining the corridor open against repeated German attempts to sever it. The combat frequently devolved into hand-to-hand encounters, with the soldiers resorting to knives, entrenching tools, and rifle butts when ammunition became scarce. By November 1st, all 211 surviving members of the Lost Battalion had been successfully evacuated. The 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry, had sustained 64 fatalities during their encirclement, but the 442nd bore a significantly heavier toll, with over 800 casualties incurred over 6 days of intense combat. On November 12, 1944, General Dahlquist ordered the 442nd to assemble for a commendation ceremony. He anticipated witnessing the full regiment, comprising approximately 3,000 men. Instead, fewer than 900 soldiers stood in formation. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, Dahlquist inquired of Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller as to the whereabouts of the remainder of the regiment. Miller's response became a legendary anecdote among veterans. "General," he stated, "this is the regiment. The rest are either dead or in the hospital." The devastating casualty figures immediately ignited questions regarding Dahlquist's leadership. Why had he dispatched the 1st Battalion into such a vulnerable position? Why had he selected the understrength 442nd for the rescue mission when other, larger units were readily available? Many veterans and historians have posited that Dahlquist viewed the Japanese-American soldiers as more expendable than their white counterparts. The controversy intensified when, despite the regiment's catastrophic losses, Dahlquist ordered them to continue offensive operations for an additional 9 days before finally granting them a reprieve. Years later, when Dahlquist approached Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Singles at Fort Bragg, suggesting, "Let bygones be bygones," Singles reportedly refused to shake his hand in the presence of assembled officers. The extraordinary heroism displayed during the Lost Battalion rescue should have merited numerous medals of honor. Initially, however, not a single soldier received America's highest decoration for this action. Distinguished Service Crosses were awarded to soldiers whose actions clearly aligned with the criteria for a Medal of Honor, a pattern of discrimination that affected Asian American soldiers throughout the war. It would take over 50 years for justice to be rendered. In the 1990s, Congress mandated a review of Distinguished Service Cross Awards to Asian American veterans of the Second World War. The review board uncovered evidence of systematic discrimination in the allocation of medals. On June 21, 2000, President Bill Clinton presented the Medal of Honor to 22 Asian American veterans of the Second World War, including Barney Hajiro and George Sakato posthumously, in recognition of their valor during the Lost Battalion rescue. In his remarks, Clinton acknowledged the profound injustice. "Rarely has a nation been so well served by a people it has so ill-treated," he stated. The statistics from the Lost Battalion rescue paint a stark picture. Men rescued: 211 surviving members of the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry, 442nd casualties, over 800 killed, wounded, and missing. Casualty ratio, nearly 4-to-1. Days of combat: 6 days to reach the battalion, followed by 9 additional days of sustained operations. However, numerical data cannot encapsulate the human dimension of this ordeal. These were American soldiers whose families were interned by their own government, who volunteered to fight for a nation that questioned their loyalty, and who endured casualties that would have shattered most units, all in an effort to demonstrate their Americanness. The psychological ramifications for the survivors were profound. Many suffered from what we now recognize as PTSD, though mental health support for veterans was minimal at the time. The Japanese cultural concept of gamao, enduring the unbearable with patience and dignity, meant that most suffered in silence. German military records and post-war accounts reveal that Wehrmacht forces were entirely unprepared for the ferocity of the 442nd's assault. The Japanese-American soldiers defied German tactical expectations. They attacked fortified positions head-on, absorbed casualties that should have halted any advance, and continued fighting even when wounded. General Friedrich Wiese's after-action reports noted that the 442nd displayed a disregard for casualties unprecedented in our experience fighting American forces. German soldiers reported that wounded Nisei soldiers continued to engage, that units maintained cohesion despite losses exceeding 75%, and that the intensity of the close combat surpassed anything they had previously encountered. The defeat in the Vosges compelled German military leadership to re-evaluate their assumptions about American military capabilities and the role of racial minorities within the U.S. Army. The ostensibly inferior Japanese-American soldiers had breached defenses that the Wehrmacht considered impregnable. The relationship forged between the rescued Texans and their Nisei rescuers became one of the most enduring legacies of the battle. Many of the Texans hailed from the segregated South and had never encountered a Japanese-American prior to this experience. The shared ordeal transformed initial suspicion into a lifelong brotherhood. In 1962, Texas Governor John Connally proclaimed all members of the 442nd as honorary Texans in recognition of their profound sacrifice. Veterans from both units maintained contact for decades, attending each other's reunions, weddings, and funerals. During periods of heightened anti-Japanese sentiment coinciding with economic downturns in later decades, veterans of the Lost Battalion were among the foremost to vocally defend Japanese Americans. They understood, perhaps more profoundly than anyone, the immense price the Nisei had paid to prove their loyalty. The Lost Battalion rescue exerted implications far exceeding its military significance. The extraordinary sacrifice of the 442nd rendered it impossible to justify continued discrimination against them. How could America maintain that these were disloyal citizens when they had endured such immense casualties rescuing white soldiers? The 442nd emerged as the most decorated unit for its size and duration of service in U.S. military history, earning 21 Medals of Honor, most awarded decades later, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, 588 Silver Stars, 5,200 Bronze Stars, over 4,000 Purple Hearts, and 8 Presidential Unit citations. Their service played a crucial role in paving the way for redress for Japanese-American internment. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, issuing a formal apology for internment and providing compensation to survivors. Many 442nd veterans were instrumental in achieving this recognition. Military historians continue to deliberate whether the Lost Battalion rescue was truly indispensable and whether the deployment of the 442nd constituted a form of discrimination. The available evidence suggests complex motivations and systemic prejudice. General Dahlquist consistently assigned the 442nd to the most perilous missions. He disregarded requests for rest and reinforcement. Most tellingly, he had other units at his disposal, larger and fresher units that could have undertaken the rescue. The tactical decision to dispatch the understrength 442nd rather than fresh units from the 36th Division remains a subject of considerable debate. Some historians argue that the 442nd was selected because they represented the most capable unit available. Others contend they were chosen because casualties among Japanese-American soldiers would have been more politically palatable than losses within white units. What is undeniable is that the 442nd could not refuse the mission without appearing to confirm suspicions regarding their loyalty. They were ensnared by prejudice as surely as the Lost Battalion was trapped by the Germans. The Lost Battalion rescue offers profound insights into the nature of citizenship, loyalty, and the devastating consequences of prejudice. It demonstrates that questioning a citizen's loyalty based on ancestry weakens military effectiveness and fundamentally violates American principles. It illustrates how marginalized groups are frequently compelled to bear the heaviest burdens to prove their belonging. Most importantly, it unequivocally proves that American identity is not defined by ancestry but by sacrifice and service. The Nisei soldiers redefined patriotism not as passive allegiance but as actively fighting for American ideals, even when America itself fell short of embodying those ideals. The rescue also underscored the inherent strength that diversity imbues within military forces. The 442nd's cohesion, born from shared marginalization, rendered them more effective than conventional units. Their unwavering determination to prove their worth drove them to achieve extraordinary feats. As the decades have progressed, the number of survivors has gradually diminished. Veterans of both the 442nd and the Lost Battalion carried the physical and psychological scars from the Vosges campaign. However, they also carried an unbreakable bond, forged in those harrowing days. Martin Higgins, a veteran of the fabled Lost Battalion, who had broadcast urgent radio pleas during their encirclement, maintained enduring bonds with the soldiers who rescued him throughout his life. Before his passing, he remarked, "Those brave men rescued us when their own families were confined back home. That wasn't simply bravery. It was a form of valor I still struggle to fully comprehend." Susito, a veteran of the Nice forces, reflected, "We ascended that mountain to liberate American servicemen. Not soldiers of a particular race or origin, but American soldiers. That's precisely who we were, despite all circumstances. American soldiers." Today, the recovery of the Lost Battalion is a key subject in military academies, serving as a prime example of exceptional small unit tactics and unwavering resolve. At West Point, an inscription on a plaque commemorating the 442nd reads, "These soldiers demonstrated that exceptional valor was a common trait." However, the more profound impact is societal and ethical. The sacrifices made by the 442nd significantly shifted America's perception of citizenship and belonging. Their dedicated service rendered it untenable to assert that allegiance could be dictated by ethnicity or lineage. Post-war, veterans of the 442nd leveraged their moral standing to champion civil rights. Daniel Enog, who sustained the loss of his right arm during combat in Italy with the 442nd, later became Hawaii's inaugural congressman and served in the Senate for close to 50 years. Spark Matsunaga, another veteran of the 442nd, joined him in the Senate. Together, they played a pivotal role in securing reparations for internment. The rescue of the Lost Battalion ultimately underscores the devastating repercussions of bias, not only for its direct casualties, but also for the nation that perpetuates it. The exceptionally high number of fatalities within the 402nd was partly attributable to their imperative to validate their patriotism through extraordinary acts of selflessness. America lost many of its most exemplary citizens because prejudice compelled them to bear a heavier burden than others. The engagement also brought to light deficiencies in military command when influenced by racial prejudice. Dahlquist's apparent readiness to risk Japanese-American lives more readily than those of white soldiers resulted in preventable casualties and remains a blemish on his military record. Nevertheless, from this injustice, something extraordinary emerged, proof that American ideals possess greater resilience than American prejudices. The Nice soldiers fought not for an ideal America, but for the America that held the potential to be, ought to be, and occasionally managed to manifest. On October the 30th, 1944, at 1600 hours, Technical Sergeant Tio Senzaki of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team emerged from the dense foliage and established contact with the beleaguered Lost Battalion. Following 6 days of the most brutal engagements in the European theater, and after enduring over 800 casualties, the vital link-up was successfully achieved. The utterly exhausted Texan soldiers could scarcely believe that their saviors were of Japanese-American descent. Some had never encountered an Asian-American individual prior to this encounter. Yet, here they were, having paid an almost unfathomable price to rescue their fellow Americans. This juncture, where prejudice encountered sacrifice, where assumption confronted reality, where Americans rescued Americans irrespective of their racial background, encapsulates both the profound tragedy and the ultimate triumph of the Lost Battalion's rescue. It represents America at its least noble, dispatching its citizens to perish to prove their loyalty while simultaneously incarcerating their families. But it also embodies America at its most noble, when courage triumphs over prejudice and shared sacrifice forges unbreakable bonds. In the year 2000, the Go for Broke monument was formally unveiled in Los Angeles, a tribute to all Japanese American soldiers who served in World War II. The monument bears the names of over 16,000 individuals who served, including more than 700 who perished in the line of duty. At the dedication ceremony, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Herschel Gober stated, "These soldiers fought two separate conflicts, one against fascism abroad and another against prejudice at home. They emerged victorious in both, albeit at a cost that should inspire profound humility in us all." The monument is inscribed with the motto of the 422nd, "Go for Broke." Yet, perhaps the most fitting tribute originates from the veterans of the Lost Battalion themselves, who insisted that the names of their rescuers be inscribed on their own memorial sites. As one Texan veteran articulated, "They are brothers." They earned that designation through bloodshed. The rescue of the Lost Battalion transcends mere military history to become a pivotal defining moment in the American narrative. It unequivocally demonstrated that heroism is not bound by complexion, that loyalty cannot be predicted by one's ancestry, and that the most profound form of patriotism often arises from those who have the greatest cause to harbor doubts about their nation. The German officers who had erroneously dismissed the Nisei as inferior combatants learned that valor eclipses ethnicity. The American generals who had perceived them as expendable discovered that the life of every citizen possesses commensurate value. The Texan soldiers, who had never before encountered a Japanese American, realized that camaraderie is forged through shared hardship, not solely through lineage. Most crucially, America came to understand that its most formidable defenders might well originate from its most marginalized communities. That true strength resides in diversity, and that the ultimate measure of citizenship lies not in one's commitment to a flawless nation, but in one's dedication to perfecting the nation that exists. Military scholars continue to examine the Lost Battalion rescue as one of the most remarkable episodes within American military annals. The tactical triumph, breaching entrenched German defenses against overwhelming odds, remains a testament to extraordinary achievement, but its moral significance eclipses the military accomplishment. The rescue exemplified that fundamental American principles, such as equality, justice, and liberty, could ultimately prevail over ingrained American prejudices. It proved that what distinguishes America is not its flawlessness, but its inherent capacity for redemption through sacrifice. From a purely strategic standpoint, the operation incurred a substantial cost. Over 800 casualties sustained to secure the release of 211 men contravenes all principles of military efficiency. However, history evaluates events by criteria distinct from those found in military handbooks. Certain victories are intrinsically invaluable, regardless of the price. Certain stands must be taken irrespective of the financial or human cost. Certain principles must be defended even unto death. The 422nd grasped this. They ascended that formidable mountain not merely to rescue the Lost Battalion, but to safeguard America's standing as a moral leader. They engaged not only against enemy forces, but also against the pervasive prejudice that challenged their place within America. They shed blood not solely for military victory, but for the foundational principle that all Americans are created with inherent equality. The narrative of the Lost Battalion rescue ultimately centers on the intricate tapestry of American identity and the redemptive power of sacrifice. It serves as a poignant reminder that citizenship is not an inheritance but is actively earned through dedicated service. That prejudice serves only to debilitate the nation it purports to protect. And that America's ultimate strength lies not in the homogeneity of its populace, but in the collective resolve of its diverse peoples to forge a shared destiny. The 422nd Regimental Combat Team engaged in a full-fledged, all-or-nothing effort in the Vosges Mountains. They committed every ounce of their being, holding nothing back. In doing so, they achieved more than merely rescuing 211 trapped soldiers. They played a vital role in salvaging America's conscience, demonstrating that even amidst its darkest periods of prejudice and fear, The nation possessed the capacity to produce citizens of such unparalleled bravery that both adversaries and allies stood in profound admiration. The forest has now reclaimed Hill 617. The abandoned foxholes are filled with fallen leaves. The remnants of the bunkers have crumbled, yet the memory endures of those young men who scaled an insurmountable mountain, who shed their blood for those who had previously disdained them, who perished for a nation that had not yet fully embraced them. They were the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They were of Japanese-American heritage. They were unwavering patriots. They were true heroes. And above all else, they were unequivocally Americans. Their sacrifice resonates across the decades, a perpetual reminder to each ensuing generation that freedom is not freely given, that citizenship necessitates commitment, and that the highest expression of patriotism involves striving to elevate one's nation to merit its noble ideals. Within the shadowed woodlands of the Vosges, a cohort of marginalized Americans proved that loyalty cannot be undermined when it is indelibly etched in blood, that courage recognizes no color barrier, and that the genuine strength of America is derived from the willingness of all its inhabitants, regardless of their origins, to stand united in defense of democracy. The Lost Battalion was saved, but more significantly, a fundamental ideal was preserved, that in the United States, citizenship is defined not by one's place of origin, but by one's readiness to make sacrifices for the principles of human dignity and equity. The 402nd demonstrated this profound truth in the most conclusive manner imaginable. They secured their rightful place in America, not through eloquent speeches, but through decisive actions, not through inherited privilege, but through acts of profound sacrifice, not through passive acceptance, but through undeniable displays of courage. This is their enduring legacy, that from the deepest wells of prejudice can spring the most brilliant acts of heroism, that those deemed least trustworthy may ultimately prove the most steadfast, and that America's paramount strength resides not in the uniformity of its people, but in their shared dedication to upholding ideals that transcend any single individual, group, or prejudice. The rescue of the Lost Battalion remains one of the most exceptional events in American military history. Its significance lies not solely in the accomplishment itself, but in who achieved it and the profound meaning it conveyed. During those 6 days in October of 1944, the 402nd Regimental Combat Team did not merely rescue a single battalion. They played an instrumental role in safeguarding the very essence of the American ideal.